I'm lost and into the dark. Some things are better left unknown. And I'll never find you here, 'cause no one's ever is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. Oh, what a sinner is it in her? What's the truth in this riddle? Is love really just this simple? I can't seem to find my way in this world that never stays. What a widow, a peaceful spider. When the glass is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. What a sinner is it in her? Is this real? Just illusion. I'm lost in the wonderland of confusion. I'm lost in the wonderland of confusion. Is this real or just illusion? Manifestation or a dark delusion? Is this real or just illusion? I'm lost in a wonderland of confusion.
This is Cynthia Sue Larson with Reality Shifters and the International Mandela Effect Conference, and you're now listening to DarkWolf's Den Show on Ripon Common Sense Radio.
Hello.
Lasers.
Hello.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe.
This is your man Meta, aka Propagate This Light, and you're now listening to DarkWolf's Den.
Are ghosts real?
We had 1,000 hours of continuous communication with the spirit world.
Does time travel actually exist?
The laws of physics seem to be compatible with time machines.
You know, sometimes I wonder about reincarnation. Don't you?
A 4-year-old boy in Adelaide, Australia, has told his parents that he used to be Britain's Princess Diana.
What would happen if the world found out that aliens were real?
I didn't say disclosure would be easy, but what is the alternative?
To establish a space force as the 6th branch of the armed forces.
We have so many questions and yet so little time, so to have you here, the pleasure is all mine.
Coming to you from a secret mountain cave, hidden deep within the Idaho wilderness, this is the Darkwolf's Den Show. Now, here is your host, Jerry Hicks.
Thank you, Walt. Ladies and gentlemen, our intro guy you hear every week, Walt House. Go ahead and give it up for Walt. Put a 1 in the chat room for our buddy Walt there. I appreciate that, buddy. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf, and welcome back to another episode of the DarkWolf's Den Show. Whether you're on the edge of reality, the edge of the galaxy, or the edge of your seat, we're glad you chose us to be right there with you. Ladies and gentlemen, it is Wednesday, November 25th, 2020, and tonight we're talking about a topic that I've been holding off on for quite a while. And now that we've got into the season, I think it's only fitting that we kick it off right. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, tonight we're talking about the story of King Jesus. That's right, we all know the biblical narrative of Jesus, but what about the rest of the story? That's right, tonight we're going to try to fill in some blanks with the evidence that has been garnered. Ladies and gentlemen, the rabbit hole goes deep and you do not want to miss this. That is tonight, Wednesday, November 25th, 2020, on the DarkWolf's Den Show. But first, today in history. And as we get in towards the holiday season, we're going to get more and more of these holiday-themed Today in Histories. And I got to say, this is one of my favorite holidays, so expect a lot of stuff about this coming season from me. So, ladies and gentlemen, on this day in 1949, a song with a moral story that we all grew up with about treating each other fairly and kindly. Ladies and gentlemen, the song Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer appeared on music charts on this day in 1949. And that is today's Today in History. And still today, a beloved Christmas song. And I'll be honest, one of my favorites. I love the old school childhood Christmas songs. It kind of brings up a nostalgia, right? Like, you know, Christmas and Thanksgiving and going to church and hearing the story of Christ and God and all that. And that's what we're going to dig into tonight. We're going to dig into a story that has been so very much retold and so well told, but might not have been told so truthfully. That's right. There's evidence to suggest that, and of course a lot of us know there's mistakes in the Bible, and you can quote the word mistakes there. Mistakes that were probably placed purposely and intentionally, but we'll get into that here in a little bit, ladies and gentlemen. This rabbit hole goes really, really deep, and we're going to start at the beginning in the Old Testament to give some context to where we're headed with this, but I promise we're going right into King Jesus. This will definitely wrap back around to where we need to go, but we got to start, like I said, with the Old Testament. And the person I want to present tonight, I heard a couple years ago when I was working at Trane Air Conditioner Factory in Clarksville, Tennessee. The reason I specifically mentioned that one, shout out to you guys if you're listening right now. I really appreciate you over there, guys. I know you're some hard-working people over there. I used to be one of you. But that is the pilot station for all the trains. That is the mothership, if you will, station, factory for all the other factories. So shout out to my friends over there in Clarksville, Derek, and all you guys over there at Trane Air Conditioner Factory. I had a couple of you guys hit me up on some videos the other day, and I really appreciate you guys. But moving along. While I was at work at Trane one night, I was listening to the Jimmy Church radio show, and he had a gentleman on named Ralph Ellis, and Ralph blew my mind. I'm going to be honest with you. The more I listened to this man speak, the more my head just exploded, and I couldn't believe it. So now that I have a chance to present this information of this type to you guys. I am glad and honored to have the ability to introduce you to one of my favorite researchers, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ralph Ellis.
My name's Ralph Ellis.
And welcome to the show, Ralph. We got a lot of information to go over and a little time to get there, so I do want to say, ladies and gentlemen listening, please keep an open mind to what you're about to hear. With that said, let us get started at the beginning.
The Garden of Eden. So where was the Garden of Eden?
Although this is still highly contested as to the exact whereabouts of the Garden of Eden, there is one location that has been put forward and agreed upon by most theologians.
And you'll say, well, we all know where it was. It was down in Babylon by the Euphrates and the Tigris.
However, as you remember when we went over Atlantis on the last episode we did, we used the clues from the actual writings. And when you do that, you find a different bit of information for the Garden of Eden's placement.
That's not what the Bible says. The Bible actually mentions the Gihon and the Perath. It doesn't mention the Euphrates. So where was the Garden of Eden?
And once again, this is a highly debated topic amongst theologians.
Well, it actually tells us, if we bother to look, because it says, "And a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from there it was parted and became 4 branches."
Well, that definitely doesn't mention 2 rivers. That mentions one river that splits into 4 branches. So is there any place that matches that, Ralph?
There is only one river in this area, in this region, that does that, and that is this one.
Would anybody like to put in chat any guesses of what river they think this would be? A river in the Middle Eastern area that splits into 4 tributaries or branches. What river would that be, ladies and gentlemen? Survey says
the River Nile.
That's right, the River Nile. Go ahead and give yourself a point if you got that one right.
It runs through the oasis of Egypt, and when it gets to Cairo, the Giza pyramids, it splits into the 4 branches. So it's quite clearly saying that the Garden of Eden was in Egypt.
Whoa, now that changes things.
But whereabouts? Can we narrow this down at all?
And that, sir, is a really good question. Is there any clues to help us narrow this down a little bit more?
Garden of Eden. What was it called in the Bible? Now, in the Bible, it was called the Gan Eden. That's in the Hebrew there. It was called the Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden.
And for those that are curious, that is Gan space Aden, Gan Eden.
Now, I think...
Now remember, this is his opinion based on his research.
The Gan Eden was actually the Egyptian Kan Eden. And here are the hieroglyphs. K, A, N, Kan, I, T, N. Kan Eden. The garden of the god Aten.
And you guys might remember this as you've heard us talk about it here before, as I'm sure you've heard it elsewhere. The god Aten was by Akhenaten, who tried to take the pantheon of gods and turn it into a solo god that only could be worshipped through him. And as you guys know, it was very unpopular after his death. They tried to erase him from history, but that's probably a good reason. Some of this information got a little mixed up, but we've got the Garden of Aten.
So where was the garden of the god Aten? Well, it was in Atamana. And that was the city, of course, of Akhenaten and Nefertiti.
Of course, if it was Aten's garden, it would be on Akhenaten's premises, one would assume.
This is where they lived. This was their new city that they built in Middle Egypt. So the Garden of Eden, the Kan Aten, was actually in the capital city of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. So what I'm saying here, if you follow through the logic, what I'm saying is that Akhenaten and Nefertiti were actually Adam and Eve.
Which would make sense actually for a lot of reasons. The least of which is we know the Israelites were actually slaves to the Egyptians for many, many years according to the Bible. So they would have been around the lore and would have known of this monotheistic God in its garden. And of course, when Akhenaten rewriting the pantheon into a monotheistic belief system, he would most likely have written this himself, that he was this figure, of course. And the Adam and Eve characters, the beginning would have been Nefertiti and Akhenaten, the beginning of this this monotheistic religion, the first two.
They were the prototype for this Genesis story. And that is why, of course, if you read the Genesis story, Adam and Eve are always said to be naked. Why? Because if you go to Amarna, you will find that Akhenaten and Nefertiti are always displayed as being naked.
Now, yes, circumstantial evidence indeed, but interesting just the same.
So here are then the two lovebirds of the Garden of Eden, and they are Akhenaten and Nefertiti.
Once again, at the beginning of this monotheistic religion, they were the first two.
And the reason I like this particular theory,
and I cannot emphasize enough the word theory here,
is because it explains things. Any good theory should be able to tell you things that you did not know before. It should enlighten us about secrets that we didn't know before.
Which is one issue that I've had for a long time with the Mandela Effect Theory series, is coming up with a theory or a hypothesis that actually explains or predicts or tells us something more than we already know. We've yet to find that particular answer just yet, but we got some brilliant minds working on it.
And this particular theory does that because it explains the whole concept of the forbidden fruit.
Bear with us, guys. I promise this is all going to tie in as we get towards the rest of the episode, but the fruit of knowledge of good and evil, the fruit of the Garden of Eden. What do we know about that, Ralph?
So what was this all about? There was this tree in the Garden of Eden, and they weren't allowed to eat the fruits. But they did eat the fruits, and therefore God was angry, and they were thrown out of the garden. What does this mean? It's very difficult to explain in logical, normal terms if we look at it from the biblical point of view. But if we put it back into Egypt, we know exactly what it means.
And how do we know that, Mr. Ellis?
Because we have an image of the tree of life and the tree of knowledge.
Oh, and where would I find this picture of the tree?
It's down at Karnak.
It can also be found at the rippinrabbithole.com. That's right, RIPONRABBITHOLE.com. Go to the On Air Live section and click on the show itself, and it should bring up tonight's show notes, and you should be able to see this picture over there.
And here it is. Okay, here it is. Here is the tree of knowledge. And you can see that it has fruits. Here's a fruit, here's another fruit. And you can see that Thoth is actually writing on the fruits. And here's the Pharaoh, this is actually Seti the First, and Seti is reading what it says on the fruits. And it's actually his name, it says Seti the First. So why is this important?
And I'm sure a lot of you are wondering the exact same thing, so tell us, Ralph, why is this important?
Well, because the name of the Pharaoh was very important. As long as the name of the Pharaoh was upon the earth and people could read his name, then his soul would have an eternal life.
And I love this concept. As long as the memory lives on, the person lives on. That's a pretty neat concept, I gotta say.
If you cut out his name from the temples of Egypt, then the Pharaoh would die a spiritual death.
Which is probably one reason they tried to erase Akhenaten from the entire history and pantheon, and probably, I'm sure, scrubbed his name from most temples and everything else. Tried to make him disappear in history.
So, what was Eve being blamed for? For cutting out the fruits that had the names of the pharaohs and the names of the gods. And that is exactly what they were doing at Amarna. Because remember, Akhenaten was the first of the monotheists. And to be a monotheist, they had to destroy the old gods and the old order. And they were sending the army around Egypt and cutting out the names of the gods and the names of the pharaohs. They were cutting out the fruits from the tree of knowledge and the tree of life. That is why Eve was condemned for eating the apple from the tree, and that is why they were thrown out of the Garden of Eden.
Is there any physical evidence to back that up?
And that is exactly what happened to Akhenaten, of course, because opposition forces threw them out of the Garden of Eden. They were sent into exile.
Which is actually kind of contentious among archaeologists.
Archaeologists will say they were killed, actually, but I think they actually probably went into exile.
And it's absolutely incredible when you go back and look at the facts with a different scope, with a different eye, if you will. It's amazing the perspective you can gain and the information you can learn that you didn't realize was there all along. And if your mind isn't blown yet, just stick around, because we got a whole lot more alternative history in the Bible to go. Moving on to our next section.
So what was the Genesis story then?
Now that we know the characters are a little bit different than what we originally considered Adam and Eve to be, and we know that Aten was the original monotheistic God, so let's look at Genesis in a different eye, with a different perspective, and see what we now can see.
So let's have a quick look at the Genesis story. So the Genesis story at the beginning of the Bible, I think, was actually a copy of the hymn to the Aten.
I'm sorry, Ralph, the hymn to the what? I've never heard of this.
The hymn to the Aten.
Okay, got it. The hymn to the Aten. All right, understood. So what is the hymn to the Aten?
A hymn written by Akhenaten himself.
I'm assuming this explains how he became God's right-hand ruler on earth?
It wasn't a creation epic. This was a story about the dawn of a new day. It was probably part of their daily liturgy. So as the sun came over the horizon, they would probably sing this song or chant this particular hymn. And it's all about the sun coming over the horizon and its rays illuminating the land and warming the animals and the birds, so they stretch their legs and they stretch their wings and they come back to life. So this wasn't the creation of these animals and birds, this was them coming back to life after the death of the previous night.
Well, that's all good and well, and once again we have an alternative history here, but where is the evidence to back this up, Ralph?
So let's have a look at a couple of these verses then. It says from Genesis, God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul.
Although this sounds like an NIV or a paraphrase version, still, I'm sure everybody can agree that's what the Bible says in Genesis, that God breathed life into man, right?
But from the hymn to the Aten, it says, to make them live, God gives the breath of life to their noses.
Okay, fair enough. That's a slight rewording, saying the exact same thing. I'll give you that.
And God separated the light from the darkness.
Once again, a line we all know pretty well, I'm sure, and at least remember, if not have heard in passing, the people have said.
As you dispel the dark.
Okay, once again, a really close meaning. Pretty much the exact same meaning, just different wording.
And God said, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that has life, and the fowl that may fly above the earth.
Okay, once again, God created every living thing above and on the earth.
God made all the peoples, the herds and the flocks, upon all earth that walks on legs, all on high that fly on wings.
Wow, that one even kept the exact same order of relation, so, I mean, yeah, we're starting to see a little bit of a connection here. That's 3 for 3 now.
And confuse their language that they may not understand one another's speech.
This, of course, being from the famous Tower of Babel or Babel story.
their tongues will differ in speech.
It's again the same, just slightly different. These are reminding me of Mandela effects. The exact same meaning, just a different wording, right? No, these are not Mandela effects, by the way. This is just new information coming to light.
And this goes on and on, all the way through the Genesis story. You can compare all of the verses to the Hymn to the Arton. It is clearly a copy of the Hymn to the Arton.
When everything starts to fall in place and line up like that, you have no choice but just accept that there's something to it at that point.
So what happened here is when they were compiling this Old Testament, they had, scraps of information that came in from all sides. And one of those was the Hymn to the Arton. And someone obviously looked at this and thought, well, actually, that looks like a creation epic. Creation epic has to go at the front. So they stuck it at the beginning of Genesis. However, this is a story about Akhenaten, and as we'll see later, this was actually part of the Exodus event. That's where it should have gone. So it should have gone in the little section about Moses and the Exodus.
And so far, we have covered the Garden of Eden, we've covered the general Genesis story, and the next thing in line would be Exodus. Ladies and gentlemen, the alternate history of Exodus.
So let's go on a little bit and have a look at the Exodus event, because that is to do with Akhenaten as well.
Get ready to have your mind blown, ladies and gentlemen.
So, Exodus. Now, we're going to have a look at a passage here that might seem a bit similar to you, familiar to you. But this is not from the Old Testament. This is from the history of Manetho. So this is the history of Egypt. And it says, 80,000 lepers and maimed priests were exiled to a quarry on the east bank of the Nile. And after a number of hardships, the people begged the king to give them refuge in the north, and he agreed. They appointed as their leader one of their priests of Heliopolis, called Ososeph. It is said that this priest framed their constitution and their laws, and changed his name to Moses.
Now, I know a lot of you are thinking, oh, this is just wild speculation. However...
So this comes from real history.
This comes from real recorded history.
So let's have a look at a few of the points within this particular paragraph. So, from the biblical perspective, first of all, looking at it from a priestly point of view, they were exiled to a quarry, just like the Israelites were exiled to a quarry in order to make mud bricks for the Pharaoh, yeah?
Yeah, I would agree with that so far.
A number of hardships, yes, making bricks. They begged the king to give them refuge in the north. Yes, they begged the Pharaoh to allow them to go on the Exodus and go up to the north towards Jerusalem.
Once again, this does validate that part of the biblical story.
What they appointed as their leader one of the priests of Heliopolis. Remember that Joseph, him of the coat of many colors, was also a priest of Heliopolis. And dare say Moses was likewise.
Okay, so once again, these references definitely match.
Who framed their constitution and their laws.
You guys want a real mind blow? Check this out. Hey Ralph, do these laws and constitutions set up by this priest still exist to this day?
Yeah, we call it the Ten Commandments.
And brain exploded. Are you kidding me? The Ten Commandments.
And changed his name to Moses. Yeah, his name was Moses.
And we all know the story of Moses bringing down the Ten Commandments, quote unquote, from God down from Mount Sinai.
So that's from the biblical perspective. Now let's look at it from the historical perspective, from the position of Akhenaten.
Now, how in the world does this tie back into Akhenaten?
He was exiled to a quarry. Yes, that was called Amarna. Remember, he was kicked out, well, we think he was kicked out anyway, of the main capital cities of the north and the south, of Karnak in the south and Cairo in the north. And he was exiled to a barren spot in central Egypt, where he had to make his own new capital city. And it was known as the quarry on the East Bank, because that's what it was. They had to make their own capital city.
Okay, so once again, the quarry lines up. Fair enough.
After a number of hardships, they had to create their own capital city. Yeah, there was lots of hardships. They begged the king to give them refuge in the north. Yes, they did. The king in this case they're begging is their own king, Akhenaten himself, because there are opposition forces trying to wipe them out, basically.
Okay, this is fair enough. A little shaky, I'd say, but fair enough.
They appointed as their leader one of the priests of Heliopolis. Yeah, that was Akhenaten's brother, who framed their constitution and their laws. Yes, they did frame new constitutions and laws because Akhenaten was a monotheist. He was changing the entire theology of Egypt and changed his name to Moses. Yes, because the brother of Akhenaten was called Moses, Tuthmosis. So what we have here is a very, very similar story. So what I'm saying here, and there is a lot more information, of course, in the books that sort of prove this particular point, is that the two brothers from the Bible, Moses and Aaron, were actually, in history, Moses and Akhenaten. So this is actually a real story. It comes out of Egypt. All of these stories appear to come out of Egypt.
And I bet a lot of you have never heard the idea that Moses was actually Akhenaten's brother. Now that is very interesting to me. Not something that I seen coming for sure when I first heard this.
And this is another one, because where did they go to? They ran off on the Exodus, and they went to Mount Sinai.
And once again, as I mentioned earlier, we all know the story of Moses coming down off of Mount Sinai to give the 10 Commandments to his people, or the new commandments of the way things are going to go in their new city, I guess.
But where is Mount Sinai?
Now that is another really good question, Ralph.
They've lost it. How can you lose your most sacred mountain? They say it's in the Sinai Peninsula, but that's impossible. You cannot take 500,000 people into the Sinai Peninsula for 40 years and have them still alive after 40 years. You'd go in with 500,000, you'd come out with 5. The Sinai Peninsula is a desert, basically. So they've lost their most sacred mountain. How have they managed to do this? Well, they keep doing this. We'll see this later. They keep losing all of their most famous characters and locations.
And like he said, as we'll see again here later, this is all on purpose.
So where is Mount Sinai? Well, this is an Egyptian story. They were moving out of Amarna, which is in central Egypt, and going northwards. So yes, we can find Mount Sinai if we look at its attributes. And what does it say of Mount Sinai?
And once again, if you go back to the original sources, that is the best place to get the best clues. Once again, as we learned from Atlantis, if we go back and read the original source text, we can actually garner more than just listening to what other people say. So what does the original source text say, Ralph?
Well, if you look at the works of Josephus and the Torah itself, it says that Mount Sinai was the tallest mountain in the region. It was steep and difficult to climb. It had a cave inside it. God was actually inside the cave. Moses went inside the cave. There are some translations says he went on top of the mountain, but it isn't. If you look in the Hebrew, he went inside the mountain.
And this, of course, being a common problem with translations, not getting the correct word where it should be. And, of course, this being no different case.
And beneath Mount Sinai, there was a pavement that was black and smooth and looked like the night sky. So where can we find a mountain that conforms to all of those points?
Honestly, when it speaks of a pavement like that, I think of a pavement like we have nowadays, that black, dark pavement that we all drive on. However, there's actually another answer for this. I did not know this either. Check this out.
Well, we can, if we understand that this is an Egyptian story, because this is Mount Sinai, and here it is. It's the Great Pyramid of Giza.
I'm sorry, Mount Sinai is what?
It's the Great Pyramid of Giza.
That's what I thought you said. And where is the evidence to support that kind of claim, Ralph?
Because it conforms to all of those points.
Oh yeah? How so?
It is the tallest pyramid in the region.
Okay, that's true.
Yes, that's why it's called the Great Pyramid.
Oh, somebody got jokes. Very funny, Ralph. Okay, so what else you got to match the description of this mountain to the Great Pyramid?
It is steep and difficult to climb. Yes, if you've been there, you will see how steep and difficult it is to climb, especially when it had its original cladding stones on there.
Unfortunately, I have not ever been to Egypt, though I wouldn't mind going someday, but that aside, I definitely can see in photos, as I'm sure we all can, that the Great Pyramid is a very steep-sided object and definitely would not be an easy task to climb. And like he said, especially when it had the shiny limestone covering on it that it used to have. The pyramid used to glow back in the day, but it's lost its shine over the years, of course, and its entire outer coating. But yes, the Great Pyramid, I would agree, is extremely steep and hard to climb.
It had a cave inside it. Well, yeah, it does. It has the chambers, of course, inside it.
If you have ever seen pictures or video of the inside of the Great Pyramid, it is extremely cavernous inside. I will give it that.
And where God was located, you've got to remember that these were not tombs. None of the pyramids were tombs. No pharaoh has ever been found inside a pyramid.
Something else that I cannot iterate enough when it comes up on this show. I absolutely love it because don't ever let anyone tell you the pyramids were burial tombs. They were not. There's no way they were burial tombs because we've never found the evidence to support it. We've never ever found a body in a pyramid, period, hands down. So clearly the pyramids had a completely different use. That, of course, being a topic for a whole nother show.
These were not tombs. This was a temple complex. And it was a temple complex that was dedicated to astronomy and to mathematics. But it was not a tomb site. So these were temples dedicated to the gods. And that's why God was located in the Great Pyramid.
Or in the temple or the Mount of Sinai. That's interesting. I'm not sure that I 100% believe it, but that is definitely interesting.
And finally, one of the most conclusive parts of this is, what was the pavement that looked like that was black?
Surely there's nothing on the Great Pyramid that is going to fit black pavement, right?
Well, you're not going to find that in the Sinai Peninsula.
Well, that is definitely the nail in the coffin for the Sinai Peninsula being the place people need to look in for the Sinai Mountain, because clearly if it doesn't have the black stone that is mentioning here, there's no way that that could be the area. But how does that connect to the pyramid, Ralph?
If you go to the Great Pyramid, at the base of the Great Pyramid, of course, we have this, the great black basalt pavement at the base of the Great Pyramid, on the eastern side of the Great Pyramid.
Black basalt pavement at the base of the pyramid. Well, that definitely fits our description a lot better than the Sinai Peninsula, doesn't it?
And of course, I mean, this is all broken up now. It was broken up in antiquity. But originally this would have been smooth and polished and looking like the night sky. So this was Mount Sinai. It was the Great Pyramid.
Once again, mind exploded. I never would have put the Mount Sinai as the Great Pyramid. That is, if you believe the evidence presented. And we've got so much more to go. We're only getting started. But it's amazing when you change your perspective on something. When you change what you see as one thing or another, the knowledge base changes. Your perception of something changes. That really changes your understanding of it, right? We've now learned quite a bit of the stories that we thought we knew from the Bible have actually turned out to be set in Egypt and be completely different characters possibly. And we're just getting started. Like I said, this new perspective is going to carry on for the rest of the show. And we've got so much more information to cover, like this.
We move on a few centuries. So this was the Exodus event. And then the Israelites were up in Jerusalem, of course. And then they grew to positions of power. And we have the united monarchy of King David and King Solomon. But there is a problem, as there is always a problem in the Old Testament.
And problems are the questions that we delve into on this show. Tell us, Ralph, what is the problem?
That all of these characters are missing from the historical record.
That definitely becomes a problem, doesn't it?
It doesn't matter whether it's, Abraham, Jacob, Isaac, King Solomon, King David, Jesus, Saul. Everybody is missing from the historical record. How can that be?
Which has always been a very contentious point amongst believers, because they point to faith and say you just have to believe and that's the way it is. However, it does make for very much contention when you cannot really prove your claims, right? Even though religion has a way of getting away with this with no problem, because once again, if it's something you can't be proved, you just have to believe it by faith and go on, which is kind of a cop-out sometimes, let's be honest, but that's getting off the point. I'm not anti-religious. I don't want anybody to think that I am. But let's get back to this problem we have here. Why are there none of the biblical characters actually in the historical record? Or are they?
You've only got two options here. Either the whole thing is mythology and it's all been made up,
which I really do not tend to personally believe. So what would the other option be, Ralph?
We're looking in the wrong location or the wrong era.
Which would definitely hinder finding what we're looking for if we're not looking in the right place. You're not going to find your lost keys if you're searching behind the toilet and they're sitting on the nightstand. You're just not going to find what you're looking for if you don't have the right information. If the information has been somehow, manipulated, if you will.
Now, the two archaeologists of Israel, Finkelstein and Silberman, have been through Israel. And they've done a lot of archaeology over there, and their assessment is that in this era, Jerusalem was no more than a village. There was no empire, there was no palace, there was no temple, there was no army, there was nothing. So where are they? Again, you've got these two options. Either it's all mythology, or we're looking in the wrong location, or the wrong era.
So, since I refuse to accept the mythology angle, which one is it, Ralph? Are we in the wrong place, or are we in the wrong time?
In this case, we are looking in the wrong location. So, how do we find King David? Well, let's have a look at his attributes again. Same as with the Great Pyramid and Mount Sinai.
And I would say with any ancient scriptural topic, it is best to go back to the actual scriptures themselves, or whatever's written about, like Atlantis, for instance, or like the city of Troy, or anything like that. Just go back to the original text and the original writings about it, and you're going to find more clues than you are going to just presuming this, that, and the other.
So what is King David known for? Well, he is known for the Star of David, of course. And he's also known for the city of David. So can we find a king who was closely allied to the star and the city? And these are the two Egyptian hieroglyphs, which gives you a little bit of a clue.
So do you think he was able to find somebody to match the star and the city at the same time that matches the story of King David?
So yes, can we find a king who is identified with the star and the city? Yes, we can. And his name was Pasiba Kahayunit. And here's his cartouche. Okay, so here's the cartouche. You read from the blunt end down to this end. So, Pasiba Kahayunit. My star rises in my city.
Wow, well, that definitely fits a lot of it. My star, my city, David's star, David's city. However, the fact that it's Egyptian, what's going on here?
And you can see his cartouche contains the star glyph and the city glyph. This is why King David was known for the star and the city. But he was, of course, an Egyptian pharaoh. But the Bible wasn't completely wrong, because he was also king of Judea, because his capital city might have been in the Nile Delta, but during their reign and the reign of his sons, they actually conquered all of Judea as well. So he was king of Lower Egypt, and he was king of Judea as well. So he was king of Judea. But his capital city was not at Jerusalem. It was in Tanis, in the Nile Delta.
So once again, we have a lot of half-truths. We have the story of David in the Bible, and the fact that he was the king of Judea, which was true to a degree, but he was actually the pharaoh of Lower Egypt. So that's a little different in distinction, I guess. But it's amazing what you find when you go back and look at the truth of these stories and not just listen to what everybody has repeated over and over and over the years.
So how can you confuse Jerusalem and Tanis? How did they get this big confusion? Well, simple. Because these two capital cities had the same name. So Tanis was called Zoan. In the Bible, this is what it was called. It was called Zoan. While Jerusalem was called Zion. They had pretty much the same name. So it was a quick slip of the pen, and they changed the name of the capital city.
Pretty easy when you have two cities with the names that close together, but why would they do something like that, Ralph?
There was two reasons for doing that. It wasn't just a slip of the pen. The new Israelite Jewish religion did not want to be equated with the paganism of Pasiba Kahayanit. He's called Susens in the Greek. They didn't want to be associated with the paganism of Egyptian theology. They did not want to admit that their primary king, King David and King Solomon, were both pharaohs of Egypt. So by all means, they had to change the name slightly.
Now you remember Egypt before and after Akhenaten was polytheistic or worshipped many gods, whereas during the reign of Akhenaten they would have been monotheistic, and that's the only time they were monotheistic, because once he was gone they returned to their pantheon. So they didn't, the Jews or the Christians of early times didn't want to exactly be put in the same boat as the Egyptian pharaohs, because they were teaching something completely different than the Egyptian pharaohs.
So that is King David. And the great thing about this is, if this is right, and there are many reasons for thinking it is right, because of course in the book I go through many other pieces of evidence. This is not the only evidence, of course. All of their family and everything else is identical between the United Monarchy and this line of Lower Egyptian monarchs. But the nice thing about this is, if it's right, the Bible is no longer a piece of mythology with no evidence. We now have the city, the tombs, and the sarcophagi.
Kind of a double-edged sword. It's interesting to find out that the possibility of a lot of the Bible stories we grew up with were slightly, if not majorly, wrong. However, fixing them definitely puts it into a more historical point of view and out of the mythological point of view.
And yes, they say King David was an extremely wealthy monarch. Yes, he was, because if this is him, this is solid silver. It is the most expensive sarcophagus in Egypt, even more so than Tutankhamun. Silver was quite an expensive metal in this era. So this is a solid silver sarcophagus with golden trimmings.
Even today, that would be incredibly fancy, but still, the amount of money needed to do something like that in that day and age, you would have had to been pretty darn rich. And being a pharaoh, of course, you're going to be pretty darn rich anyway, right?
So you're getting this theme running through these books, that the whole of the Old Testament comes out of Egypt. What the Old Testament was, it was the day book of the pharaohs of Egypt. Specifically the Lower Egyptian pharaohs, the Hyksos, the shepherd kings. The day book was the diary of the pharaohs. It recorded all of the events of the royal court, the family, their relationships, their deeds, their wars, everything that was going on. And that's what became the Old Testament.
Which, again, knowing that the Israelites spent a lot of time in Egypt anyway, especially Lower Egypt, then this would be pretty much par for the course. Like, it's not going to be super surprising that they would have this information, being that they were there. Now, if they were from across the world, it might be a little surprising they'd have it if they'd never been there. But the fact that they were held in captivity by the Egyptians for so very long, that really leads credence to the fact that this could very well be exactly what the case is. But are you mind blown yet, guys? Has this information really made you think twice about everything you thought you knew about the Bible? That's one thing I love when it gets into this alternative history, especially when you've got the evidence to back it up. Because we know for a long time that history, and well, still is, written by the victor. It's always his story. Whoever wins writes the history, right? You don't know what really happened. You know what you were told happened. And, you know, when you go back and start looking at the details and really start filling in the gaps, it tells a different story than what most people will tell you. A lot of people just parrot what they've heard over and over and don't even go try to do the research to verify that what they're saying is actually true and not just something someone else said and wanted them to think was true, or even a mistaken fact on someone else's part. So, you know, really always do your research. And we've learned, at least with these last 2 episodes, if you go back and look at the actual original source text, you're going to find more clues than if you just kind of dance around and look what everyone else has said about what is going on. And with that said, ladies and gentlemen, it's getting toward the top of the hour here. We need to go ahead and take a network break, so we're going to stop right here, and we'll be right back with the second half of the Darkwolf's Den Show, where we go from the Old Testament to the New Testament right after these messages. You stick right there. Don't you touch that dial.
We gotta stoke the fires and run off the men in black. Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back.
Sex in the city? Nope. Interview with a vampire? Nope. If you build it, they will come? Febreze? Tweeze in the middle? Wrong again. Depends. Nope. Welcome to the Twilight Zone, my friends. A phenomenon known as the Mandela effect. You may have heard of it. You may want to not neglect. Unbecoming, awake, and spiritually inclined. So sit back, relax, while I blow your mind. Take the thumb off the cell, stop following the sheep. Down the rabbit hole we go. Are you ready for that leap? The Zapruder film, #JFK. I looked at the footage and I said, what the heck? How come there are 6 people in that dang car? Stretch limo, for me, this was all too bizarre. A glass behind the driver, no way, Jose. I remember before in the car, my mind was in total disarray. Trying to make sense of what I was seeing, what I was witnessing. Didn't connect with my inner being. A second woman in the car for me was only the first lady. Do you smell what the rock is cooking? All this seemed kinda shady. Berenstein Bears. Nope. Shazam? Sinbad? Not in this reality. Good lord. An awakening. Was it all a revelation? The naysayers and skeptics call it confabulation. They say we misremembered and call us bat crazy. Did you smoke a doob? Maybe that's why it's a little bit hazy. Unless you experience it, you'll never know. But enough of that. On with this Mandela effect flow. Mandela effect in the house. What in the world happened to Ed McMahon? In this reality, Publishers Clearinghouse was not a fan. Never the spokesperson, but we remember it clear as day. McMahon holding that check while the winner yelled out, yay! American Family Publishers, never heard of them until now. This Mandela effect has me raising the people's eyebrow. So many theories on what it could be. Have you ever heard of CERN and the LHC? Luke, I am your father. Nope. Sally Fields? Nope, wrong again. That stands for the Large Hadron Collider. I thought I would mention. You know, the machine that opens up portals into different dimensions? You're probably thinking that this is all science fiction, but you gotta think outside the box and have no restrictions. Alternate realities and parallel dimensions. Okay, I get some of your apprehensions. Could this all be a spiritual evolution? Cause the human race has grown tired of this toxic pollution. Mandela effect in the house. Nope, you're not going crazy. Some people people, they just don't understand. That's just the way it is. You know? Stay strong, my friends. That's just the way it is. Dolly has no braces? Are you serious? Good lord. Joel Osteen. Oh wait, Joel Osteen. So what the heck happened to the L? Oh my gosh. Oh, this is definitely the Twilight Zone. This is crazy. Anyhow,
Juanito 1975 with the very best rap on YouTube regarding the Mandela effect. Hi everyone, it's AJ, the Rippin' Rabbit. How are you tonight? Are you enjoying your weekend kickoff with Jerry Hicks and the Darkwolf's Den Show? If you are, and you haven't done so already, please make sure to thumb up that video, hit that subscribe button, and ring that bell. You'll get our notifications every time we go live. Jerry will return again tomorrow night with another episode of the Darkwolf's Den Show, starting at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. All shows start at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. And if you haven't done so already, please hop on over to the Rippin' Rabbit Hole and jump on our mail list. Subscribe to our mail list. We'll send you our weekly schedule direct to your mailbox every Wednesday morning. It resumed again this morning. I'm glad to announce it's actually back. Now, if you are subscribed to that mail list and you got the mailing this morning, you will know that tomorrow, Thanksgiving Day, starting at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, the Darkwolf's Den Show will kick off a Thanksgiving Day special. That's right, Jerry howls in the holiday and the holiday season, as a matter of fact, in a special Thanksgiving night broadcast. Be here or be square. Then I'll be back Friday night with a look at gifts and gadgets. Are you looking for ideas this holiday season? Dive through a collection of crazy gift ideas and gadgets that will leave you bewildered, shocked, and amazed. I got a few gifts up my sleeve. Be here Friday night and find out just what you could add to your wish list. Then Saturday night, November 28th, rock and roll, baby. That's right, we're going to dive through the rabbit hole of rock and roll fame together. Did you ever want to be a rock star? I know I did. I still do, as a matter of fact. I play a mean air guitar and air bass. I know some of you can attest to that. Come along with me Saturday night as I twist through the rabbit hole riffs of the legendary rock idols and the fame they were able to achieve. It's going to be an interesting show that night. Then we'll end out the weekend right, Sunday, November 29th. Can you believe it? The end of November, my goodness. Crop circles, that's right, 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. End that weekend right as we look into the theories and the realities of crop circles. From known hoaxes to the unexplainable, we'll end out the weekend right. That's a look at your weekend ahead right here on the very best of Common Sense Radio, the Rippin' Rabbit Hole. We now return back to Jerry Hicks and the Darkwolf's Den, howling at alternate history, the Bible.
If you were meant to be controlled, you would have come with a remote, but you didn't. And that's why you listen to the Darkwolf's Den Show. Now, here is your host, Jerry Hicks.
That's right, I am Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf, and welcome back to the second half of the Darkwolf's Den Show. Whether you're on the edge of reality, the edge of the galaxy, or the edge of your seat, we're glad you chose us to be right there with you. Ladies and gentlemen, it is Wednesday, November 25th, 2020, and tonight we're talking about alternative history, the Bible. That's right. In the first half, we learned that the New Testament, above many things, was written and set in Egypt, not the common places that we're told in the story that it's set. And if the Old Testament blew your mind, you just wait till we get into the New Testament, ladies and gentlemen. you might need something to sop up the brain matter that's left flowing out of your ears. We're about to blow your mind to epic proportions, ladies and gentlemen. It is my honor and pleasure once again to reintroduce to you guys one of my favorite researchers and our friend for tonight here on the show. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ralph Ellis.
So if we move on, as we will, to the New Testament, bear in mind, of course, that all of this came out of Egypt. And that's what we'll be looking for when we look to find Jesus in the historical record.
Among many other popular New Testament characters.
Because we have this same strange situation where the two most powerful and well-known people of the last 2,000 years, the two most influential people, St. Paul and Jesus, are both missing from the historical record. How can that be? How can we lose all of these famous characters?
Now, Jesus, again, I can somewhat understand with the whole crucifixion and raising from the dead. But St. Paul, I don't understand why he would be completely missing from the historical record. That don't make any sense at all.
Again, either they're fiction, mythical.
And again, that is an option I refuse to accept. So what other options do we have, Ralph?
Or we're looking in the wrong location.
It could very well, again, be looking in the wrong location. We had that problem earlier, right?
Or the wrong era.
And which one is it, Ralph? Mythical, wrong era, or wrong place?
In this case, we are actually looking slightly in the wrong era, as we will see later. So I've called this, the title of this particular page, Prince Jesus.
Okay, I know we have a lot of really strong, faithful believers in here, and we've got a lot of people that aren't of such belief systems. The only thing I will ask from both sides is please keep an open mind about this information. I'm not saying this is 100% true. I'm not saying it's 100% not true either. I'm saying I'm here to present it, so please keep an open mind about this information. Again, I'm not asking you to believe it or even buy into it. I'm just asking you to listen and take it with the unbiased vision that I would hope we would all look at things with. Now, on to Prince King Jesus.
Or King Jesus, that's what one of my books is called. And you'll say, no, of course, he was just a carpenter.
That's the story we're all taught, right? He's just a lowly carpenter from a poor family, right? Well, not exactly.
No, he wasn't. Because the New Testament does not say he was a carpenter, of course. What it says is that he was a tecton.
And like a lot of the Bible, it comes down to a matter of the actual translation from the Hebrew into the Greek into the English. Check this out.
And a tecton does not mean carpenter. It means an architect. You can hear the Anglicism on the end of it.
And a carpenter and an architect are definitely two different things, but it goes even deeper than that.
But this was not a builder. He was not making houses and temples. He was a speculative architect. He was a mason.
Oh yes, those masons.
And if you read the raising of Lazarus in the Gospel of John, it is a standard third-degree raising from any Masonic temple.
So the story of Lazarus is basically the ritual that must be reenacted if you are in the Masons, and in order to move up to the third degree and continue your learning, then you have to reenact this in a play form, a skit style, if you will. But it's interesting that it's right there in plain sight. Anybody wants to know what the third degree skit, if you will, is, just get the story of Lazarus out of John, and there you go.
So he was a mason. Masonry goes back into Egypt, of course. It's a very old institution. So Jesus was a mason, but he was also royal, and we can have evidence of this because King Herod feared him. King Herod would not fear a carpenter, of course, but he would fear a prince who had arrived in his realm, especially if he had better credentials, of course, than he had himself.
That is one thing that never made sense to me, why Herod would fear a simple carpenter. You know, he really didn't like Jesus, and he was scared of him, he was. But it wasn't because Jesus was a carpenter. Oh no. It's because Jesus was of a royal bloodline, an earthly royal bloodline at that.
He was also hailed as the King of the Jews. So if you go into any church or cathedral pretty much around Europe, you will see an image of Jesus sitting on the cross, and on top of him will be a little sign saying, INRI. And what does INRI mean? Isus, Nazrani, Rex Isus, Jesus the Nazarene and King of the Jews.
And if I remember correctly, in the crucifixion scene, there was a sign. I'm not sure if they hung it on the cross or what they did, but there was a sign to some degree that said King of the Jews. And it was to mock Jesus was the whole point. At least that's what we were taught it was supposed to mean. However,
you can't have it both ways. You can't say that this guy was a carpenter and then in every church you put on a sign saying he was the King of the Jews. So he was royal. He was a king.
And not just the spiritual king or the king of heaven, if you will, but a literal king of a kingdom on earth.
And as we've seen before, he was probably of Egyptian extract, which is why if you look at the books of Josephus Flavius, he's often called the Egyptian false prophet because he came from Egypt. So we're looking for a prince of Egyptian extract.
And it's a lot easier to learn what we're looking for when we have the right clues, right? Just like with Atlantis. And we just learned that Jesus was of Egyptian descent and that he was a king of some type and considered a false prophet of Egyptian descent. And that's interesting. Also, you guys have heard of us talk about Josephus Flavius before on this show. He is one of the few historians through all of history who we credit with recording history. Him, Herodotus, and like 2 or 3 others is all we really have for recorded history. Now think about that for a minute.
Mary Magdalene was also royal and rich. If you look at the Golden Legend, or even the works of Robert Eisenman, you will see that the tradition was that Mary Magdalene was both royal and very rich. Robert Eisenman says that she was probably the richest woman in Judea. Slightly different emphasis on the story.
Which would still make sense with Mary Magdalene and Jesus being together if they were both royals.
So, can we find this particular prince in the historical record? And again, the way we're going to do it is by looking at some of the attributes. What we're going to do is look at the nativity.
And of course, this time of year, the nativity scene is one of the most popular scenes around, and you're going to be seeing it a lot in the next month or two, so it's really interesting that we would start right here, and it really kind of fits the season, does it not? Plus, you know, it's best to start at the beginning, and the beginning of Jesus' story is the nativity scene. Let's do it.
So what are the elements of the nativity? Well, first of all, Jesus was royal. We've just seen that.
And that, of course, is clue number 1.
But also, not only rich, but fairly obscure. We're looking for a royal family here that was so obscure they could easily be lost from the historical record.
And clue number 2, a royal family that is obscure and may get lost in history.
And you will not have heard, unless you've read my books, you will not have heard of this particular royal family. So we're looking for a royal family that was pretty obscure.
And the next clue that we find in the text?
They were on a journey for some reason. Yeah, we all know about that.
According to the biblical record, there was a taxation going on by the Roman emperor, and everybody had to return to their home towns, which is why the Joseph and Mary were traveling back to where they were traveling to.
Something to do with taxation. They were in a state of poverty. I mean, this was supposed to be a royal family. What were they doing looking for an inn or going into a stable?
Yeah, that part definitely does not make a lot of sense to me now.
They were in Judea, or Syria, in about AD 4, roughly. They were Jewish, of course.
Which is yet another relevant clue. The fact that they were supposedly looking for a stable when they were a royal family, so I doubt they were looking for a stable now. So that changes that part of the story. What else is there from the text? Are there any more clues to go on, Ralph?
And final interesting point, they were visited by the Magi. the three kings. But
okay, now this could be an interesting clue, but who were the Magi?
The Magi were actually the priesthood of Persia, the kingmakers and priesthood of Persia.
So these sound like some pretty important people, huh?
So what were they doing being interested in a Jewish carpenter in Judea?
One that was supposedly from a poor family and was born in a stable nonetheless. Yeah, that doesn't make any sense at all.
Doesn't make sense, does it? But he was a prince. And if they were interested in a prince, then he must have had some Persian blood. So he must have been of Persian extract as well.
Wow, and that is yet another really important clue that would have probably been overlooked at any other time.
So we're looking for an Egypto-Persian prince. So can we find this character in the historical record?
So a prince born to a royal family of Egyptian and Persian descent who was born during travel while the family was traveling for some type of royal decreed reason. Can we find any character like that? Tell me, Ralph, what do we got?
Yes, we can. So I think he belongs to this family. So let's have a look at their family tree.
Once again, this is from Ralph Ellis' own research, so do not take this as 100% in stone. This is the way it is. This is merely what his research has presented. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, get ready to have your mind exploded once again on this show tonight.
And as I said before, you probably saw in one of those books there that I think he was descended from Queen Cleopatra.
That's right. You heard that right. He could be descended from Queen Cleopatra. Check this out.
So, this is the family tree of Cleopatra. Here she is. She's at the top here. She married Mark Antony, and she had a daughter called Cleopatra Selene.
The Selene part will be important here shortly.
But she was also married previously to Julius Caesar, and when Julius Caesar was murdered on the Ides of March, 43 BC, if I remember correctly.
As I'm sure most of us remember from history class in school, so this is all pretty simple so far.
She was pregnant, and she ran back to Egypt, but we don't know what happened to this pregnancy. But I think we do, because if we move on 25 years, we have a new emperor, Octavian Augustus. And Octavian gives some diplomatic brides. He had this whole brood of royal children around him. So he gave away some diplomatic brides.
And to be clear here, yes, that is a nice way of saying marrying it off for the good of the kingdom or for the sake of the kingdom. Diplomatic brides. But this is important. Remember Selene we spoke about earlier.
Now he gave away Cleopatra Selene, the daughter of Cleopatra, to Yuba II.
And who was Yuba II, Mr. Ellis?
Yuba II was the king of North Africa, of Tunisia, Algeria, Libya. You've got to remember that in this era, that part of the world was very rich, and it remained fairly rich until it was taken over, of course, in the Muslim invasions.
So far we've got Cleopatra, then we've got Cleopatra Selene, her daughter, who has been married off to the king of this rich area of South Africa and Libya and this area. I think you said South Africa, some part of Africa anyway.
But he also gave away this lady, Queen Thea Musa Orania. And this is the lady that I think is connected to the biblical family.
And why would you think she is connected to the biblical family?
Why do I think this family is connected with a biblical story? Because their history fits the biblical nativity. So if we look at the various points then of this family, so here they are. They were a royal family and they were rich. I forgot to mention, she married Phraates IV, who was the king of Persia.
So Queen Orania, Cleopatra's daughter, I'm assuming also, was given away to the king of Persia. Now we have an Egyptian-Persian connection. Here we go. Interesting.
So yes, she was rich. I mean, Persia was one of the wealthiest parts of the world in this era. They were on a journey for some reason. Yeah, because she got kicked out of Persia.
So the she that he is referencing and that we're about to continue talking about here is the daughter of the French or Persian king and Queen Urania. This is Julia Milena Urania of Abiabene, Adiabene, something to that degree. Anyway, this is the character that we're going to be referencing because it gets really confusing here. It speaks of Urania and Urania. So the Urania we're talking about now is the daughter of the queen and the Persian king.
So yes, she was in exile. She had been kicked out of Persia. She was in a state of poverty, yes, because she was in exile. She was in Judeo-Syria. That's where she went to. She went to the borders of the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire in about AD 4, roughly.
So far, it would explain why she needed the stables. It would explain why most every other part of the story would make sense, including her being royalty because, well, she was kicked out, but she was royalty by blood just the same.
And visited by the Magi. If this particular family had had a son, yes, the Persian priesthood, the Magi, would have been interested in this particular birth because any son to this family would have been a potential prince of Persia because Theomusa Urania was married to the king of Persia, Phraates IV.
Am I the only one that thinks of the video game Prince of Persia when you hear that? How programmed are we, guys? That aside, sorry, I just needed to break that up just a little bit, but seriously though, the fact that this would have been a king or a prince at the time of Persia means that the child that she was bearing would have been Jesus. In other words, Queen Urania would have been the character that we call Mary, also known as Mother Mary or Mother of Jesus.
That's why the Magi turned up at Jesus' birth. They would not be interested in anything Jewish. They would not be interested in anything Roman. They were only interested in the Persian royal family. And he was half Persian, well, quarter Persian, through Phraates IV, the king of Persia.
Okay, so a lot of these connections are falling into place, but I thought Jesus was a king of the Jews. Wouldn't he have to be Jewish for that? I mean, it makes sense to me.
Well, yes, they were Jewish, A, because they were Nazarene, but also later on they converted, as it were, to Orthodox Judaism in the AD 40s. So yes, they would have been considered to be Jewish as well.
Well, that pretty much covers all the bases, and that would definitely make him Jewish one way or the other, right?
So the history of this family fits the nativity quite well, but there are other reasons for suspecting that this family was connected in some way to the biblical family.
And just when you thought the rabbit hole had gotten really deep, you find another entrance, and it only goes deeper, ladies and gentlemen. Check this out.
And one of those reasons is that this family are very similar to the goddess Muse Urania.
And once again, if you are interested in seeing this picture, just go to the rippinrabbithole.com. That is RIPONRABBITHOLE.com. That's right. When you're over there, click on the On Air Live button, and then click on tonight's Darkwolf's Den Show, and you should be brought to the page with the pictures on there. The picture we're talking about now, of course, is going to be the lady in the blue and white. And it's got the, looks like a flag of stars on the left bottom side. That is the picture that we're referencing in this section. So if you want to follow along, make sure you go over there once again to the rippinrabbithole.com. RIPONRABBITHOLE.com. Hit that on air and get in there and check those show notes for tonight, because it's going to make a lot more sense. And Ralph is going to do the best he can to explain it, but if you want something to follow along, make sure you go over there and check out those show notes.
So here is Muse Urania. Now, this is not the queen, this is the goddess. This is the Greek goddess called Muse Urania, and she was the queen of heaven. And that's why she's dressed like that. She has a uniform, and it's a uniform with a reason. She was the queen of heaven, so she has the blue of the sky and the white of the puffy clouds. And above her head, she has the stars of the cosmos because she was the queen of heaven.
Now, wait a minute. The Queen of Heaven, that sounds like another character that we hear about in the Bible, right? Same character we were mentioning a moment ago, right?
But if we look at the iconography used for the biblical family, if we look at the iconography for Mary, of course, you will see that she is always displayed as Muse Aurania. She has the blue cloak of the sky, the white dress of the puffy little white clouds, and she also has the 12 golden stars around her head as Muse Aurania. So she's not only Muse Aurania, the Queen of Heaven, she's also an incarnation of Isis as well, the Egyptian Isis.
So this one person has been called by at least 4 different names through history. Now that's interesting. It definitely makes the search for truth just a little bit harder, doesn't it?
So this is another reason why I think Muse Aurania and the Virgin Mary here have some sort of link. But of course, again, this link comes back into the modern world, of course, because we are still using this iconography, and we use it, of course, in Europe, where they have adopted this as the European flag. This is of no coincidence. The actual guy who made the flag for Europe said he based it on the book of Revelations, where this is given. So that's why in the EU we have the 12 golden stars of Mary on a blue background.
And there's you a fun little piece of trivia. The EU flag was inspired by Revelations. There you go.
Because we are still using the same iconography. But it's interesting in this, you have to wonder, is this iconography based on Mary, or is it based on Isis? Because Isis, Mary is just being here an incarnation of Isis as the Queen of Heaven. So, is this Egyptian iconography, or is it Judeo-Christian? I don't know.
And of course, knowing that the Old Testament was completely set in Egypt, there's a heavy Egyptian overtone on this, so it really is hard to tell.
Anyway, it's just interesting. But if we go down this family a little bit, of course, this family had children, so if we look down the family tree...
So I'm going to do a bit of a recap because it gets really confusing really quick. So we know Cleopatra and Mark Antony had kids, and we know about that line. Then we know that Julius Caesar and Cleopatra had a kid. That was Aurania. And then she was with Phraates, and she had a child named also Aurania. So Aurania has a child, which we heard about earlier with the stables and being poor and in exile and all that. That is this Aurania's story, of course. This is where we're at now. So this Aurania would have been the one that would have been Mother Mary. Not the first Aurania that was married to Phraates, but her daughter Aurania is the one that would have gained the Isis, Mary, all that connection. This would have been who this is. So we're 2 generations down, now going into 3 generations down from Cleopatra herself.
Okay, here they are. So if we look down 2 generations of these people, they were living by now in Judeo-Syria on the borders between Persia and Rome. And we find this character here called King Izates again.
King Izates is about to become a very, very relevant character here.
You probably will not have heard of this particular character, but he's quite influential, quite important, because this guy was the guy who fomented the Jewish revolt of AD 65, and he was captured by the Romans after the Jewish revolt. Now his short name, his nickname, was actually...
Wait for it. You guys ain't gonna believe this. King Izates. What do you think his nickname was?
King Isis.
I'm sorry, what?
King Isis.
That sounds a lot like a character from the Bible that we're all familiar with, right?
And I think you'll find here that this is who we're looking for, because he was King Jesus. So Isis was Jesus, so it's not a name necessarily descended from Joshua, it's a name that has Persian links to it, and he was called Isis. Remember, in the Greek, his name is Isis, is how it's pronounced in the Greek. They don't pronounce it Jesus, of course. Isis.
Well, it's interesting that that'd be the Greek pronunciation, and we just happen to find a character in history that happens to match that. And it's a very good likelihood this is our guy, so let's find out a little bit about this King Isis.
And it came from King Isis. who was the king who led the Jewish revolt in AD 65 to AD 70. And we're going to have a look at that very shortly. But being a royal family, of course, Jesus could afford courtiers, so he had courtiers. Jesus was famous for his miracles.
But if Jesus was just a king, then how could he have performed biblical godly miracles? Well, Jesus may have been one of many magicians of his time. Check this out, guys. And again, take this information with an open mind, I beg of you. I know these topics can be quite touchy and can be upsetting to some. I only ask that you take it with an unbiased, open mind. I'm not asking you to believe it. I'm not asking you to disbelieve it. Just take it in. And with that said, were the miracles that Jesus performed actually miracles?
But were these miracles or not? Because Jesus was a prince and he was able to afford courtiers, advisors, and court magicians. Which was the most famous of all of his miracles? I put it to you that the most famous miracle that sort of proves, and some people, base their life on this, was turning water into wine.
I would definitely agree that that is one of his most famous and well-known miracles, for sure.
So this was his most famous miracle, but this was actually a famous trick from the 1st century AD, because we know that people were using trick wine jugs.
Say what?
No, seriously. That changes things.
And the guy who invented these particular jugs was called Hero of Alexandria. And who was Hero? Well, he was the Leonardo da Vinci of the 1st century AD. This was a guy who in the 1st century made fire engines. He made automatic doors. He made metal birds that sang. He made a steam turbine. But one of his most famous tricks was actually trick jugs that turned water into wine.
Sounds like this guy ran the trickster shop of the 1st century, right?
And here is one of his jugs. We even have an illustration of it. So this is a jug that was specifically created to turn water into wine. And Hero says of this particular jug, "We may pour out wine for some, wine and water for others, and mere water for those who we wish to jest with." It was a jest.
It was an absolute joke, a jest. And this is from the guy that created the trick wine bottle in the 1st century. So Jesus would have been well aware and known about this thing.
This is from the 1st century AD. Everyone would have known about this in the 1st century AD. It was used by the courtiers and by the priests of Israel, obviously. So
if it's true that Jesus was really King Esus, or Prince Esus probably at the time, then he would have had the ability to get his hands on these, and that would have been something at a wedding especially that would have been no problem. His mother probably even already knew it. That's probably why she said the whole line in the Bible to set it up to begin with. That is speculation, of course, but there's another good point here, Ralph.
But you've got to ask yourself, why don't you know that this was a well-known trick from the 1st century AD? Why are some people, like nearly 1 billion people perhaps, are basing their life and their entire belief system on what was well known to be a 1st century trick?
Which is a question that I still ponder to this day, because a lot of people still don't know that information, and you guys are lucky tonight because you've been here and been privy to hear it for yourself. So you have learned something new that a lot of people just don't know.
Jesus was employing, quite obviously, Hero of Alexandria, because he was the guy who made these jugs. So he was a prince who was able to afford his own magi, his own magician.
As most royals and well-to-do families at the time would have done.
But where did they come from? Well, I think they came from this place here. Every royal family needs a power base. They too had a power base, and they came from Palmyra.
What's really wild, I mentioned Tennessee earlier in the program and that I'd grown up there, but I grew up actually on the outskirts of Clarksville in a little place called, we said it Palmyra, but it would be Palmyra, which, interesting little synchronicity there. I always love when I hear that name come up.
And Palmyra is a strange place because it's right in the desert, and it just in the 1st century AD, it turned from being a desert village, basically, into being one of the most important towns in the Roman Empire.
Which is odd to do in such a short time span, especially in this time and era.
All of a sudden, and the historians will say, okay, it was based on trade between the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire. No, it wasn't based on trade. It was based upon the fact that a queen arrived in that town, and she not only brought with her 200 courtiers and a complete army, but she brought with her half of the Persian treasury. That's why it became so rich. So yes, she was poor to start with because she had nowhere to stay, but she had half the Persian treasury, and she could build whatever she liked, and she did. So here it is. This is Palmyra. I don't know if you've been there. If you get the chance, it's one of the finest ancient temple sites there is.
Now, your population all of a sudden swelling because a queen and her entire court has moved in, that would definitely make the city explode really quickly.
So here's a map of Judea. Here's the Dead Sea. Here's Jerusalem. Here's the Sea of Galilee. And then we run up towards Damascus and then up to Palmyra. And it is right in the desert. And the reason they chose this land, well, they were given this land, in fact, is because it was the dividing land. It's desert country, and it divided Persia over here from the Roman Empire over here. And they were given this land on the assurance that they protected the eastern borders of the Roman Empire. That's why they were allowed to keep their army, their private army that they had. And also, it was tax-free. So it was a tax haven as well. It was really good.
Tax-free is always good. I don't care what the situation. Tax-free is tax-free. I'll take that any day. But seriously, though, it sounds like they had a pretty sweet setup. Just protect the border and you're good.
But you'll see here, it became known as Aurania, and that's the name it has even today. So it was called the Kingdom of Aurania, and it was called that after the queen who went there, of course, because her name was Thea Musa Aurania. So it was called the Kingdom of Aurania. But if we translate that into English, that becomes...
I really hope you guys are ready for this. Get ready, buckle up, hold your hat, grab onto something. This one's going to blow you away. Check this out. What does that name mean? The city of Arrhenius, or Kingdom of Arrhenius. What does it translate to?
The Kingdom of Heaven. That's a direct translation.
I'm sorry, it translates to what?
The Kingdom of Heaven.
Well, if that doesn't change the entire meaning of pretty much the entire Bible, I don't know what does.
So when the Bible, the New Testament, says that the Kingdom of Heaven is nearby, well, yes, it's only about 200 kilometers.
Wow, that really wouldn't have been far at all, would it? It's just right up the road.
You've got to understand what it's talking about.
And when you gain the understanding, the new perspective, the new eyes to look at things with, things take on a whole different meaning sometimes.
So, Jesus, as I said, was a rebel. He was involved in the Jewish revolt. This is King Jesus, of course, the guy I said who was involved in the Jewish revolt. And you'll say, no, so this is what the New Testament was all about. It was a documentary, a little bit like Gone with the Wind, yes? It was a dramatic story set at the time of revolution. And you'll say, no, it wasn't. It was all about love and peace. No, it wasn't. This was revolution. And we have the remnants of the revolution in the New Testament story.
And at the time, it was a great upheaval and a revolution in society going on, including the Jewish revolt, which is a recorded historical fact.
If we look at some of the elements that will not be preached from the pulpit, it says...
Once again, going back to the original text, this time being biblical scripture. These scriptures might not be the famous ones you guys are aware of, but check these out.
Jesus said, "Think not that I've come to send peace on earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword," because this was a part of a revolution.
And revolutions are never, ever pretty. A lot of people think it's a renaissance and this big, lovely. No. There are times when it gets really messy, and it's kind of what we're looking at in this country today, revolution. And revolution is not always pretty at all.
Then said Jesus unto them, He that has the purse, let him take it, and buy a sword.
So he advised his disciples to go arm themselves. Go get yourself a sword. I bet they didn't teach you that in Sunday school.
So the disciples were armed. That's important later. Remember that.
You heard the guy. Remember that. The disciples were armed. That is important later.
And then he goes on. And when you hear of wars and rumors of wars, be not troubled, for such things must be. Brother shall betray the brother to the death, and the father the son. And the children shall rise up against their parents, and shall cause them to be put to death. And you shall be hated of all men for my name's sake. You could not get a better description of a civil war than this.
Wow, I thought he was describing the American Civil War there for a minute. Turns out he was reading the Bible. Huh. That's exactly what it was, a civil war within the country.
And this is what was generated in AD 65. They had a civil war. It's called the Jewish Revolt. And we know that Jesus was involved in this revolt because at the crucifixion event, it says of Jesus, well, it says of Barabbas, of course. And there was one named Barabbas who lay bound with them and who had made revolution with him and who had committed murder in the revolution. So when was this revolution? Was this the AD 30s? The relative stability of the AD 30s?
Because remember, according to the Bible, that is the time frame that this would have supposedly all been set in, around the AD 30s, 0 to 30, of course. Jesus would have been supposedly 33 when he started preaching. And so this would have been around the 30s AD or AD 30s. However, is that where we find this Jewish revolt at in history, Ralph?
No. This revolution was the AD 70s, late AD 60s. It started in AD 67, it went through to AD 70. It was the Jewish revolt. And we know that because the leader of the Jewish revolt in AD 67 was King Jesus, this unknown king that nobody knows about, who is a historical character that we know was involved in the Jewish revolt.
And we've already marked out earlier how King Isis is easily King Jesus of the line of Cleopatra. So this very well is most likely the same guy. And the reason that I really do believe that Jesus exists is, the Talmud speaks of Jesus. It speaks very, very negatively of Jesus, and it says that he should be boiled in very nasty things, but there's no reason they're going to create a character to hate, number one. Number two, if he is fictional, like a lot of people think, and of course we've proven tonight that he's not fictional at all, but even if the argument would be put forward that he was, in the Talmud, he would be the only fictional character, and we know there's not a really good chance that they just made up a fictional character to hate. And the reason they hated him is because he led the Jewish revolt and failed. So the Jews were at no degree happy with him whatsoever.
And that is why, on the front of my book, I portrayed Jesus as being like a Knights Templar, with the shield and the sword, and of course the crown on his head, because he was involved in a revolution, the Jewish revolt. So, what happened to him?
Okay, guys, you thought the rabbit hole went deep so far. We're about to take it to a whole new depth, guys. I'm about to present something to you that is, if you haven't had your mind blown so far tonight, this is guaranteed to top it off. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to connect two things that even I would have never connected. Here we go. Check this out, guys. Could you believe that I could connect King Arthur to Jesus? Well, I can't, but Ralph can, and here's how.
I said earlier I was going to link Jesus and King Arthur. So how on earth are we going to do that? Well, we do that via these subsequent events, because this guy, King Isis, was captured at the end of the Jewish Civil War, when Jerusalem was destroyed in AD 70 and the Romans took over. He was captured and he was taken initially to Alexandria and then to Rome. But what happened to him? The obvious thing to do to a character like this would be to kill him, knock him off.
Which is the martyr story that we get in the Bible. However, that might not have been what actually happened.
But for many reasons, they couldn't do that. He had too many very influential supporters, so they couldn't kill him. So the only alternative is to send the guy into exile. Now, where do you send a dangerous rebel? What you have to do is send him as far away as you possibly can from his position of power. Now, his position of power is Judea, where in the Roman Empire is as far away as you can possibly get.
Anybody got any guesses where the furthest edge of the Roman Empire from Judea would be? 3, 2, 1. Survey says...
The answer is England. Diwa, which is in Chester. And the reason I think he was sent there was because at this very moment in time, in the early AD 70s, by the same emperor, they built this new fortress. And this new fortress was called Fortress Diwa, which they built in Chester, and here it is. And this is a very unusual fortress, and for many reasons. So let's have a look at those reasons. So that's the fortress, and it was the largest fortress in the Roman Empire. Strangely enough, it was hiding behind forests and marshes. Fortresses are made to dominate a region. They are not meant to be sitting behind forests and marshes and hiding away on the edge of the empire. And it was the largest of the fortresses because it had this self-contained element within it here, and it had its own accommodation block for this self-contained unit, its own temple, and its own bathhouse. So here was a group of people who would not even bathe with the Romans. This is the bathhouse down here. So we have this separate element here with their own accommodation, temple, and bathhouse. So who was in this part of the temple? And I think the answer is fairly obvious.
This does not sound like a regular fortress. Something tells me this wasn't a fortress for fighting, was it, Ralph?
Fortress was not a fortress to defend England. This was a Guantanamo Bay.
So if King Jesus was exiled, then he would have been exiled into England, supposedly, as far away from Judea as possible. And the reason is they actually had a Guantanamo Bay style prison camp in England. So this would put him in England at least, right?
This was built as a prison fortress to house dangerous political prisoners, dangerous to the Roman Empire. Because as I say in this book, Jesus didn't want to just take over Judea. He wanted the throne of Rome, because the throne of Rome was empty at this time. We're talking AD 65. We had the unstable Nero on the throne. He was deposed in AD 66, if I remember correctly. The throne of Rome was empty, and it was open for whoever could grab it. And he wanted to take over the throne of Rome, because he was the most powerful prince in the Roman Empire, of course. He was related to Cleopatra. He was related to Julius Caesar. He was related to Phraates IV. He was the most powerful prince in the Roman Empire. He could have taken over the throne of Rome.
So leading the Jewish revolt, he wasn't just leading the revolt. He wanted to lead it all the way to the seat of the throne of Rome. Of course, we know he failed in that, which is why he got exiled once again into England.
So how do we get from this to King Arthur? Well, we're in the right region, of course. We're now in, the Welsh borders. But how do we get from King Jesus to King Arthur? Well, I think we can see the evidence from the Round Table symbology.
Okay, now you have definitely sparked my intrigue, Ralph. What do you got, buddy?
So here is an image of the Round Table. Okay, so here we can see, hope you can all see that this is King Arthur and his 12 knights of the Round Table, and they're all armed, of course.
And of course, we're all aware of the famous picture or depiction of King Arthur in the Knights of the Round Table, so I didn't think I really needed to include that in tonight's show notes. If you're really interested, just Google Knights of the Round Table, and you'll probably come up with something pretty quick.
Now, the legend has it, if you read the Vulgate cycle, which is the great cycle of Arthurian legend, written in about the 14th century, there were 3 tables, and they were based one upon the other. The first table was the table of the Last Supper, with Jesus and his 12 disciples. So the Last Supper table should have been round, not oblong like it's portrayed in Leonardo da Vinci's picture.
Now, that's something I did know, and very interesting point of fact there. The round table is what was used for the Last Supper, not the square table that we're used to seeing. That changes things a little bit. It's also interesting to note the 12 Knights of the Round Table, the equivalent of the 12 disciples that followed Jesus in Judea, interestingly enough.
The second table was the table of Joseph of Arimathea and his 12 disciples.
Also thought to be Josephus Flavius.
The third table was the table of King Arthur and his 12 knights. And the one was based on the other. So the Last Supper table should have been round.
So again, to be clear, they're based upon one another, not stacked upon one another. One is the basis for the other, starting with the Last Supper table and moving on through to Josephus Flavius and then the Knights of the Round Table at King Arthur. So there's one small link.
And don't worry that these guys are armed, of course, because we've just seen that the disciples were armed as well. That's what it says in the New Testament.
And you remember he said the disciples were armed with swords, and to remember this, it would be important later. And we do remember the Knights of the Round Table were also very much armed with swords.
But this imagery is not quite correct.
Oh, and why would that be, Ralph?
Because the Arthur character, the Jesus character, should be sitting in the middle of the table.
And when he says the middle, he means the literal middle of the table.
Yeah? Why? Because this is not the original symbolism for the round table.
Wait a minute, you just told us one was based upon the other, so what is the original symbolism of the round table then?
The original symbolism was much more esoteric than this, and we're going to look at it. So this is going to change. Have a look at it. This is the original symbolism. It's the zodiac. So this is what the round table was based on. It was based upon the standard view of the zodiac. So here is the Jesus character, the sun, Helios, the Son of God. And that is a play on words that was deliberate, and it works in the Greek as well as it does in the English, yeah?
The Son and the Son of God. Now that's interesting, because the Son is, made of God. God made the Son.
So here is Jesus, the Son of God, surrounded by his 12 disciples, the 12 signs of the zodiac. This is the symbolism of the round table.
And it's funny how your perspective can change when you learn new information. At least it's supposed to anyway. With a new perspective, you look at everything with a new eye, and you gain a new learning and a new understanding. But I'm still confused. How does this connect back to Jesus? We know the King Arthur. Now we know the round table was based on the Last Supper table, which was based on the zodiac, but how does this connect back to Jesus?
How did they devise this new name? Why did they devise this new name? Well, the reason they had to devise it, of course, is fairly obvious. The story now is that Jesus was exiled to Britain, where he was a prisoner in Fortress Diwa.
One of the many pieces of evidence we've looked at so far this evening, yes.
You could not tell this story. These stories were written, of course, in the Vulgate cycle in about the 13th and the 14th centuries AD. You could not write that Jesus had survived the cross and had been exiled to England and lived the rest of his life as a prisoner in England, because that was absolute heresy. For telling such a story, you could be put to death. In fact, you could be burnt at the stake.
One thing about the past, no matter how true it was, if it didn't agree with what the church or the modern people in power said at the time, then it really didn't matter, and you really were risking the ultimate, your own life, just for believing or saying what could have very well been true, but you dare not better say it, or else.
So by all means, you would have to change the name of this particular character. And they did, and they changed his name to King Arthur. So King Jesus, with all his battles against the Romans in Judea, became King Arthur, and all these stories of these battles were relocated into a northern hemisphere, northwestern European location. And if you look at these stories, half of these stories could well be Judean stories. They're talking about castles being short of water. In Wales? You must be joking. These are stories that came out of Judea, and they've been transplanted into a Welsh and a northern French location.
And you guys know, as we said in the beginning, history is written by the victor, and history isn't always the truth as we know it. As a matter of fact, a lot of times it is purposely wiped away or misconstrued to make one side or another look one way or another. And the only one that gets to write the history is the winner of any war. You never hear the loser's version of the battle in history, do you? So it makes you wonder, have we been lied to most of our lives about the true history of things that happen? Of course, I think that that's a really good possibility. Do you think that we've been lied to, especially about the Bible? And do you think it was misconstrued purposely in order to hide a lot of the truths that were actually going on? I don't know. I mean, I tend to believe that a lot of what we heard tonight could very well be true. I know there's a lot of history that's been covered up, and don't worry, this is only the first in a series of episodes we're going to be dotting along every now and then with the alternative history series. Of course, this one being the first one. And I don't know, guys. When you get information like this, it really changes your perspective, and it changes the way you look at a lot of things in the world, especially when you go back and read the Bible with eyes like ours, knowing what we know. So what do you guys think? Do you think it all could be true? Do you think the history that we've been taught is very much a lie? And do you think what we've put forward tonight is much truer than history, if not the absolute truth? Do you think King Jesus was really King Jesus and King Arthur? I don't know. In the end, ladies and gentlemen, we can apply a little bit of common sense, look into history, and you guys know it. In the end, ladies and gentlemen, you be the judge. We got to close it out. That's right, that's it for this episode of the DarkWolf's Den Show for Wednesday, November 25th, 2020. I hope everybody has enjoyed this look at the alternative history of the Bible with Mr. Ralph Ellis. Guys, don't worry, this episode may be ending, but we will be back on the airwaves tomorrow night with an all-new episode. That's right, tomorrow night is a very special night. As you guys know, it is Thanksgiving, and if it's already Thanksgiving where you're at, I do wish you a very happy Thanksgiving and hope you have a wonderful rest of yours. We will be back on the air tonight, or tomorrow night, I guess you should say, with a brand new Thanksgiving Day special episode, guys. Fun, facts, music, you're not gonna want to miss this. Make sure you tune in while you're letting that turkey dissolve in your stomach. That's right. Then on Friday night, AJ the Rippin' Rabbit will be back on the airwaves with the Rippin' Rabbit Hole live show. That's right. He's got some great topics this week. I've been over here eavesdropping on the rabbits again, guys, and I happen to know that on Friday night he's going to be talking about gifts and gadgets. The holiday season coming up, it's only fitting that Black Friday he talk about the gifts and gadgets of this year. Are you going Christmas shopping? Are you looking for some ideas? Maybe this will be the show for you. Then on Saturday night, he comes back on the airwaves again with the rock and roll fame. That's right, guys. The rock and roll, the fame, what has it done to people? You got things like the 27 Club, right? You've got all these rock stars who have died at the same age. You've got a lot of craziness goes on in the fame of rock and roll. And I have a feeling AJ had some experience behind the scenes with that in his younger years. That's right. Then on Sunday, ladies and gentlemen, AJ closes out the weekend right with crop circles. That's right. I actually thought about doing this topic myself recently, so I'm glad I did, and I cannot wait to hear AJ's take, I should say, on crop circles. That's right. Also, guys, make sure you go down over to the rippinrabbithole.com. That's right, that is RIPONRABBITHOLE.com, and record a Never Nothing November greeting for us. That's right, go down to the bottom of every single page over there. You're going to find a big red button that says record. Record as a holiday greeting with a name and what you're thankful for, and we will put that on the air for you. We're going to be playing all of them together as a montage tomorrow night, so I hope you guys are around to hear everyone's Never Nothing November thankfulness message. Also, while you're over there, guys, make sure you drop in on the 24/7 Backstage Lounge. That's right, that is my favorite hangout. That's where I'm going to go right after the show. That's right, I'm going to be over there hanging out with the crew, and if you want to hang out with me, it's really simple. While you're over at rippinrabbithole.com, just go to the 24/7 Backstage Lounge. That's right. You select that, go down halfway down the page where the VIP entrance is. It's going to ask you to okay your camera and microphone. That's okay. Once you get in there, you can turn those off and just use text chat. We've got quite a few friends in there that do just that. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope everybody has a very safe and wonderful rest of the morning, evening, night, day, whatever it may be. And on behalf of Walt House, Chick Mandela Effect, Michael Musco, AJ the Rippin' Rabbit, and everyone at Rippin' Common Sense Radio, we thank you for being here. And remember, until tomorrow night, ladies and gentlemen, stay awake, but dare to dream. That's right. Good night, everybody. How? Yeah!
I'm lost and into the dark. Some things are better left unknown. And I'll never find you here, 'cause no one's ever What a widow, a peaceful spider. When the glass is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. Oh, what a sinner is it in her? What's the truth in this riddle? Is love really just this simple? I can't seem to find my way in this world that never stays. What a widow, a peaceful spider. When the glass is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. What a sinner is it in her? Is this real? Just illusion. I'm lost in the wonderland of confusion. I'm lost in the wonderland of confusion. Is this real or just illusion? Manifestation or a dark delusion? Is this real or just illusion?